Another event, of course, that we know about that happened in Sydney would have been the biggest news story of the weekend. Again, I hate to call this a story because, as we all know, the events that happened in the Bondi Junction shopping mall in Sydney, Australia, are a horrible, horrible mass murder and a tragedy to everyone who was a relative of the people who were stabbed and killed in that mall on Saturday. It was very interesting, however, and again, I say interesting is not just a matter of interest, but it's far more disturbing than that. Of course, you've got to always think about the people who were victims there. But commentators in the UK and the USA immediately jumped on the event and immediately said that this was done by a jihadi. Now, not everyone, most people, for once in the mainstream media, they did the right thing in not immediately jumping to conclusions. And I say that when I have general disdain for the mainstream media and people who work for governments around the world who have been oppressing people, of course, for the last 4 years in the West. But some commentators jumped on this immediately, and they were wrong, because we found out very soon after the fact that it wasn't a jihadi, it wasn't an Islamist. And yes, Islamists do carry out many, many terrorist attacks and stabbings like this, the attack in Moscow recently, the Manchester Arena attack, the attacks in London Bridge, and so on and so forth. You can name a whole stream of Islamic terrorist attacks that have happened in the West and other parts of the world, but this was not one of them. The person, as we now know, was called Joel Cauchi, and he was someone who had mental illness, a history of schizophrenia, a history of having knives, and then being taken off him by his parents because they were worried that he was going to do dangerous things with those knives. And latterly, we hear he was working as a male escort, which is not really a job to be proud of, particularly. And he was also apparently quite socially awkward. So he killed 6 people in the mall, 5 of them women, 1 of them a man, and a baby also was stabbed and is now in hospital fighting for its life. A number of specific comments I want to highlight. Here is Rachel Riley. Now, Rachel Riley is known in the UK as the host of a game show called Countdown, but she's also a patron of an organization which is called the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. Now, this NGO pushes for more hate crime and hate speech laws and more restrictions on free speech on the internet. I disagree with their statements and their policies and what they want to happen in terms of law in the UK. But Rachel Riley wrote on Twitter, or X as it's known now, for 6 months now, people have been out on our streets proudly calling for Intifada revolution. If you want to know what globalized the Intifada looks like, see the Sydney Mall. 5 victims stabbed to death, 8 transferred to hospital, including a baby, due to 1 man and a knife. In the second Intifada, over 1,000 Israelis were murdered, and so on. Sydney Mall, multiple times over, is what they've been proudly calling for. Now, she doesn't specifically say that this was a Muslim or an Islamist or a jihadist, but it hints that this was done by someone who supports Intifada, which obviously is related to Palestine in the past, and she's relating it to the marches in London, which some people are smearing as hate marches when they're actually just calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the slaughter of innocent women and children there. Now, she has since deleted that tweet and tried to make an explanation, which doesn't sound particularly convincing. No, I'm not going to say that she was stirring up hatred, but it's very interesting that she works for an organization that is often accusing people of stirring up hatred and trying to put in place new laws against stirring up hatred, etc. And it would be very interesting to see what would happen if someone, for example, reported her to the Scottish police under the new Stirring Up Hatred, Hate Crime and Public Order Act, and what a judge would say about what she's written on the internet about this, jumping to conclusions before all the facts were known. Another person that made a comment and made a video about this was Tommy Robinson. Now, Tommy Robinson is not a real person. Tommy Robinson is a character played by Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who in his life has had as many names and aliases as Grant Shapps, who is the current Defence Minister of the UK. You can look that up for yourself. It'll be very interesting if you dig into that and what you find. But he put out a video and almost immediately saying, we're being told it's too early to jump to conclusions and say anything about this. But he says there's only one group who would do this, jihadis. And he goes on to talk about jihadis, Islamists killing people, and this is to do with Islam. Again, he was proven to be wrong. He jumped the gun. He said this was jihadists. It wasn't. It was a man with mental illness. Another person was the American commentator, a Jewish woman called Laura Loomer, who portrays herself as a conservative. But she said more brazenly and openly, an Islamic terrorist went on a stabbing spree in Sydney, Australia today in the name of Islam while screaming Allahu Akbar. Several people have died and many more are critically injured. The jihadi stabbed a mother and stabbed her baby. The mother died shielding her child. Absolutely horrific. Now you all see why I feel the way I feel about Islam, and you never see Islamic groups condemn this barbarism. Now, I will be the first to condemn Islamists who actually do carry out an act of violent jihad and go and kill innocent people. This wasn't one of them. Again, this is someone who jumped the gun. And it was very interesting, and I think to some extent disturbing, that this all happened on the same day that Iran launched its retaliatory strike against Israel for what Israel did on the 1st of April in bombing the Iranian consulate in Damascus. And there seems to be an attempt somehow, whether it's coordinated or whether it's just people who do this and push this narrative all the time, that there is some attempt to stir up feelings that there is a global jihad underway and that we are under threat by jihad in the West, when at the moment, I would say one of the main threats to global stability is actually the actions of Israel and what it's doing in Gaza and what it did in Damascus in Syria. It's lashing out and attacking countries all around the world. So I think we need to be very, very careful when we listen to people coming out with these kinds of statements very early on. And now we know that actually these statements were incorrect and they put the blame on somebody or a group of people who, in this case, were not to blame. And we need to make sure that we don't feed anything in to escalating the situation in the Middle East and marching towards World War III, which is going to be bad for absolutely everybody.